Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another Goosebumps Series 2000 book review for you all. And we're going to be looking at book number 11, Attack of the Graveyard Ghouls. Now, Attack of the Graveyard Ghouls has been a book I've been dying to get to for some time, and as we're nearing the end of my Series 2000 book reviews, I thought why not go ahead and begin the end with this book and work my way down to the ones I'm not so excited about. And I can remember reading this book for the first time when I was maybe 12 or 13 in my middle school years. This was a book that I never got around to reading when I was in elementary school. But when I got back into Goosebumps during the Cartoon Network re-airing era for the TV show in the mid-2000s, this was a book that I saw at my library, and I remember checking it out and reading it for the first time, and I absolutely loved it. And I can't believe that this book has been on my to-be-read list for like years now, and I haven't gotten around to reading it until this point. And I'm glad that I started here to finish Series 2000 because, man, this book was great. Honestly, I needed a great Goosebumps book to read. It's been a while since I've hit a really good one. And all the hype behind this book over the years just makes so much sense. This is such a riveting Goosebumps book. Not without its flaws, but I will say what this book has going for it is nonstop action, great villains with high threat levels, intense moments that are actually pretty creepy and arguably scary, and intense atmosphere. Paired with probably one of the best Tim Jacobus Goosebumps covers of all time. I mean, this book is a shoo-in for every Goosebumps reader to try at least one point of your life. And I can totally see the novelty now that this book was added into the classic era reprints. Thankfully, it was probably due to the Goosebumps movie using the graveyard ghouls that's are depicted on the cover and in the movie there, which isn't accurate to the book, by the way. But thankfully, the movie used the monsters and it got a reprint. So if you're looking for a copy for this just to read casually and you don't want to throw money down on the real thing from the Series 2000 iteration of it, you could probably go to your local bookstore like Books A Million or Barnes & Noble right now and buy a copy in the classic reprint form. So yeah, go check this book out if you haven't read this thing before. It's absolutely incredible. So with that out the way, let's talk about Attack of the Graveyard Ghouls. So the story starts off with this kid named Spencer Casimir, and he lives in this town known as Highgrave. And Highgrave is a very old town in an unknown state of the United States, and it has a spooky history. Something shrouded in tragedy, as we learn later on. And Spencer starts off the story by sharing what he's written in his English class essay as he's sharing it with his class. And his teacher and his fellow students keep praising him as he's sharing this legend of the graveyard ghouls that supposedly haunt this cemetery that's atop of this hill of Highgrave that goes back hundreds of years and is said to have actual ghosts living in the graveyard, and these ghosts perhaps belong to, the town's history and tragedy, and specifically an event that we learned that happened in the town back in the 1700s involving two people that we get to kind of know in the story in some significant regards. But because of his story, his teacher thinks it would be a fun idea that maybe the town starts, or the class starts exploring the town's history. And by that, she suggests that maybe the kids go to the graveyard and look at the tombstones and see the names of the dead and get a sense of the atmosphere there. And we see that Spencer has a good friend named Audra who might have a crush on this really big jerk named Frank, who happens to be the main bully of the story. And Audra has this habit of, weird macabre art. As the case with a lot of these R.L. Stine ghost stories, there's always that one kid who likes tracing like tombstones and what have you, and we see this actually happen. So Spencer and a few of his cohorts end up in the graveyard atop of the hill. And when Spencer is there, he's brought his baseball cap and his book bag, and he's looking around at the graves nearby. And he gets startled when he finds this one grave of these two boys buried with each other. And the boys' names are Oswald and Martin Mance. And let's just say they belong, as we find out in the story, to a tragedy that happened back in the 1700s, and they are said to be a part of said tragedy where essentially the town was burned down and many people lost their innocent lives. Well, Spencer, being Spencer, he's kind of afraid of the graveyard and doesn't know if he really believes in the legends of these graveyard ghouls. He's only written about them, and he kind of glorifies them in some way, but like I said, he doesn't know if he really does believe in it. Well, he gets spooked and thinks that a hand comes out of the ground, and it causes him to tumble over a tombstone. And it just so happens to be the Mance brothers' tombstone. And when he does this, he embarrasses himself in front of his fellow classmates, and he can't help but try to make an escape out of there as fast as possible. But in doing so, he accidentally leaves behind his backpack and his baseball cap, which plays a role, as we'll find out very soon. So when he gets home, he's telling his parents about his day and his experience. But in a conversation and thinking about how he has to work on his English paper, he realizes that he's borrowed something from his brother. And I can't remember what it was, but it's probably insignificant. And it's left in his book bag. And he realizes that he has to go back to the graveyard to get the book bag and his baseball cap that he left behind there. So he calls his friend Audra on her house phone. You got to remember that this was made in the late 90s. There was no real cell phone for kids to get yet that was readily accessible. So just know that while you're reading it, you modern kids out there. But anyways, Audra agrees to come help him go to the graveyard and get his stuff. But when they go there, let's just say Spencer has this harrowing encounter that he cannot explain, and he feels this cold shiver in the wind, and the way the book describes it is very vivid, and it catches him off guard. And of course, there's a fake out where he thinks that there's like a head inside of something that freaks him out. And when he tells Audra that he's found his backpack and his baseball cap and they need to go ahead and leave, Audra is actually tracing a headstone of a little baby, which keeps her distracted enough to get Spencer ambushed by this guy that Audra has a crush on, who happens to be Frank. And Frank is with his buddies, and they have brought some rope to tie Spencer down with. And it turns out that Audra absolutely does not like Frank anymore because of what he's doing, and urges him to stop doing what he's doing, but they just laugh it off, and they take Spencer over to a headstone, and they tie him up there and just walk off and try to leave. And Audra, being Audra, instead of waiting around with Spencer, she decides to run off with Frank and give him a piece of her mind, and I guess go get help, because there's no way to cut him out of the rope. So Spencer is left there by himself in the night, in the cold, in a spooky graveyard. And then he starts to hear these voices. These voices seem unearthly, and at first he's questioning if they're real, but then he kind of succumbs to the idea that maybe they are real. And they're saying that they need his body. And they get closer and closer, and he starts to feel weaker as they get closer, and then he feels this pressure on the top of his head. And once this pressure gives away and he realizes that he's floating above his body, he looks down and realizes that he's out of his body and something else happens to be in there. And as this being is in his body with black eyes looking up at him and is telling him, it's not your body anymore, it's mine now, Spencer can't help but on look as Audra comes back to the graveyard with her parents and Spencer's parents to help free Spencer. And Spencer is trying desperately to convince them that that's not him. But they can't hear him because He's now in, I guess, an astral projection or spirit form. And this graveyard ghoul who has taken over his body leaves off with his body. And he can't help but feel that he's stuck at the graveyard. And at this point, we see that Spencer starts to feel this, I guess, unearthly force dragging him back down to the earth. And it takes him over to this gravesite that appears to be the Mance brothers' gravesite. And he's getting pulled underground, and like this, I guess, natural feeling of himself is telling him that he needs to go to sleep forever, and he's about to, and just give up and just stay dead, I guess. But there's a noise above the grave that keeps him awake, and he reinvigorates his need to go get his body back. So he ends up out of the soil, and when he gets out, he notices that a bunch of other spirits in the graveyard are also out. And they're doing this weird dance, and it's kind of captivating. And he's asking them, you know, what has happened to him and what have you. And they essentially tell him that you're screwed, dude. Like, your body was taken by this guy named Oswald Mance. He was a 15-year-old psychopath. He was responsible for the town tragedy all those years ago. And he's an evil dude. And now he has your body, and we wish we could help you, but the only way that you can find a way out of this graveyard is if you do it yourself. And as they're doing this weird trance-like dance, you know, Spencer finds himself kind of in the same predicament where he either chooses to stay in the graveyard with these people, or I guess spirits, and just stay dead, or continue to fight. And as the spirits get tugged back down into the earth, and Spencer thinks that he's going to be succumbing to that as well, he decides to try to make a break for it. And luckily, the wind decides to carry him over to an area where he sees a very graphic death of a rabbit getting eaten alive by a bunch of rats. And he takes it upon himself to remember what happened to him when he lost his body, and decides to do something to a rat, let's just say, and practice on it. And he ends up being able to body swap into the body of a rat. And from this point, we know that Spencer needs to get back to his house and try to figure out a way to convince his family that his body was taken from him. And we see Spencer going through, you know, the motions of being a rat and doing something really gross, like eating like a bug, and then finding a school of rats eating rotten meat in a dumpster, and the rats are attacking him and like puncturing his flesh. It's very graphic. But Spencer narrowly escapes with his life and makes his way to his backyard, but he's greeted by his family's cat, and his family's cat then attacks him, and he feels like he's going to die in his cat's mouth as his cat is essentially trying to eat and kill him. Well, Spencer takes it upon himself to do this same thing that he did to the rat onto his family cat, and it perhaps works. And now in the body of his cat, he tries to go inside to tell his parents or maybe his siblings what's going on. But of course, he can't talk. There's a vocal barrier, so he has to find different ways to do so. And when he's trying to convince his parents in their bedroom with like a notepad and whatnot, it doesn't work, and his parents kick him out. So he decides to try to go find his body and see what's going on with it. And there's a very gross scene that we see with Oswald Mance in the body of Spencer eating literally anything that he possibly can inside of the fridge, and it's absolutely disgusting. And we get a sense that Oswald senses that Spencer is in the body of the cat, and he reassures him, like, hey, you're still not getting your body back. As a matter of fact, because you're so annoying, I'm going to find a new body, one that's more suitable for me. And once I'm done with yours, I'm going to destroy it. Yeah, we're dealing with this type of villain in Goosebumps. And this alarms Spencer immediately, and he's like, all right, enough is enough. I need to find a better way to get my body back. But he gets taken by Oswald and put into a cardboard box with a spider. And Spencer is like, well, he already knows I'm the cat, so I might as well possess this spider and then find a different body somehow. So he does so, and he ends up in his brother's room, who happens to be asleep. And he goes up to Jason's head, and he does the ritual, and he's telling Jason, hey, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you your body back. I just need it because I need to talk to people and convince them that this is going on. So he takes Jason's body, and from there, this is where I guess the climax of the story takes place, where in Jason's body, Spencer decides to go over to his family and wake them up and say, hey, look, my body's been taken. The town's in danger, blah, 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 blah. And of course, his family doesn't believe him. So, in Jason's body, he puts on a parka and he heads out the door. But he notices that the town is essentially being destroyed. Mailboxes are crushed, cars are overturned, on fire, houses are being burned, sheds are being burned. And there's a scene where we see Jason, or I guess Spencer in Jason's body, finding Oswald, who has possessed, his actual body, stealing an axe from a police officer and almost killing the police officer in the process, running from the police and chopping up a shed to light it on fire. So Jason heads over there and he's like, well, you're gonna get yourself hurt, blah blah blah, and trying to plead with Oswald to stop what he's doing. And Oswald's not listening, and Oswald takes it upon himself to possibly target a new body, let's just say, and it may or may not be Frank. Well, around this point of the story as well, Spencer gets the bright idea to maybe go over to Audra's house because Audra might be able to help in the situation because nobody else is going to believe him. So he goes over to Audra's window, sees that she's sleeping. He tries to wake her up. And when she wakes up and she goes over to him, there's a big recontextualization about Audra. And Audra might not be Audra. And it may or may not be another ghoul that has taken over her body. And once that's revealed, Spencer realizes that the real Audra might be back in the graveyard and he needs to go save her. Because now this is more than just him, it's him and her, his best friend. So he goes back to the graveyard after narrowly escaping being killed by these two psychopaths who have possessed these two kids' bodies. And he ends up finding Audra in the graveyard. And there's a dog there, and he tries to teach Audra how to do what he's learned how to do, and he happens to get through to Audra enough to allow her to get a new body. And they head back to the scene and the destruction of this town. And when they get there, Highgrave has essentially already halfway burned down. People are freaking out. The property's destroyed and whatnot. And of course, it comes to a point where there's a character that we thought was taken out of the equation, and it may or may not involve the actual Jason, who wants his body back. And this causes the end of the climax where, Oswald and I guess I should go ahead and say that Audra is possessed by Martin, are onlooking the two of them doing this weird dance as they're fighting over Jason's body. And it turns out that this dance may or may not put Martin and Oswald into a trance long enough to have enough effect to get them out of the bodies, let's just say. And that's a very weird mechanism, right? But once we think that the story is over from there, there's a plot twist near the end where Stein, I guess, was going for a more humorous ending. And I'll just leave it there. And that in a nutshell is what you're going to expect out of Attack of the Graveyard Ghouls here. So, I'm going to say this up front. It's been a while since I've read a very Prowse-heavy R.L. Stein book. And this was incredible. The way he wrote imagery in this book, the way he wrote Spencer's monologue was very detailed and action-oriented. We don't really get to know much about Spencer as a character. He's not the most fleshed out thing ever, but he's very rootable in the story. And he's almost like a universal type of rootable, because what happens to him is absolutely awful. Whether we're talking about what Frank does to him at the graveyard, or whether we're talking about his talents that he's able to share with us readers, like in terms of his writing ability and maybe his friendship with Audra. You can tell that he's a very selfless person when it comes to his friendship with her. And Audra's kind of the same way. So yeah, he's very rootable and relatable, and what he goes through in this story is some of the most brutal things I've read in a Goosebumps book, honestly. I mean, it was hard to read at some points because you really feel for his character. And the fact that the story, put him in all these perilous situations, it showed that Stein, at least at this point of Goosebumps, was willing to push the envelope a little bit with the stories that he was willing to do with kid characters. And I think that this honestly feels like one of the most mature Goosebumps books that I've read, despite its silly nature at times. This was really great stuff with the characters, the writing, the atmosphere, the town itself of Highgrave has like this urban legend and tragic backstory. It's not the most fleshed out thing ever, but we really get a sense of how expansive this town was. And honestly, reading this entire book made me realize that this would have been a fantastic two-parter in the original Goosebumps show if they knew how to do the story justice. I think that this would have been a classic episode from start to finish. The pacing is great. It's excellent. This is a genuine page turner in Goosebumps, honestly. Like, you start the book and you want to see where it goes. And here's the thing. I love me a good oddball Goosebumps book when it's good. This book starts you off in that traditional haunted cemetery type of story, a la something like Ghost Beach, or maybe The Ghostly Stare from Haunting Hour. And you're like, oh, I see the tropes. They're kind of tired. I see the jump scares, which aren't really bad here. They're kind of clever at some points. They can be annoying if you're programmed to think like that. They're not overdone, though, but I could see if you'd find them annoying. But then once the whole thing in the graveyard happens with Spencer, and he's tied to the tombstone, and the thing happens to him and his experience with the ghoul, this story kicks into high gear, man. And I'm telling you, Oswald, Mance, and I guess I'll throw in Martin, too. They are legitimate, and I mean legitimately, great villains. I know in the past I made a top 5 Goosebumps villain list. I'm reconsidering putting these two on there as the honorable mention, or actually on the list, because these two were incredible. I mean, the way they spoke to Spencer and how sinister he was, they were to him, is insane. I mean, the links that these characters went to, it reminded me of the villains from Ghost in the Mirror, and maybe Norband from Headless Halloween, if they were combined together. And they made this story pop, for better or for worse, and they really did make this book amplify, and it really did work. I don't know what else to say. It was incredible. I was taken aback by how great this really was with these characters. And for a book that is not, your traditional Goosebumps story where it takes some time and a couple of days to take place the entire story, this book is like I said, it's lightning. It takes place all in one night. It's a spectacle book, but the action is very riveting. The body swapping stuff with the rat, the cat, and the spider, that was really cool. And ending up in a human body, like Jason's body, for example, for Spencer. The stuff that he sees when he's in his various bodies is very creepy. And I have to tip my hat. There is multiple scenes in this book that I would say are legitimately scary. Like, my favorite scene of this entire book, by far, was the axe scene. I was like, ain't no way they're about to kill a police officer. And as a matter of fact, the police officer was threatening to pull a gun on him. So that should tell you that this book went for it, man. Yeah, incredible stuff there. And there's also some really thought-provoking stuff, too. Maybe in terms of, there's this one scene with Spencer in his rat form, thinking about what he's about to do to his cat. And knowing that he is dispelling an animal out of the body, he realizes that what he's about to do to his cat is awful and might kill it, sadly, but he needs its body for the greater good. And that is very deep stuff for a kid's horror book. You don't see characters going through that in a story, so that was really good. I mean, honestly, there's a lot to love about this book, and I really, really, really want to give it a 5 out of 5, honestly. But there is one thing, and one thing only holding this back for me, and this is a travesty, y'all. Like, if this had a better ending, maybe if it swung just one more time for the darkness, this would be up there with Werewolf Skin as my favorite Goosebumps book. But, the final 2 chapters, man, it gets silly. And you have to really think about how all of this mechanism works. I mean, I get it. This is a fictional story. I get it. This is a supernatural ghost story. Typical logic rules don't really apply to ghosts. And while the story doesn't go too far with like the body swapping element stuff, where I can kind of let that stuff slide and just give myself to the disbelief there with that aspect, the aspect of the dancing doesn't really make much sense. It doesn't make much sense. And there's this whole thing about a sign that, you know, I didn't touch on this in the plot review with Spencer, but Spencer sees this sign in the graveyard saying that in order to, I guess, defeat the dead, you have to be living. And how Stein tries to tie in dancing to that realization is so forced and silly that I don't know if I can really commend it. You know, maybe, just maybe in the future, after I finish Series 2000, I can see myself forgiving that. Maybe. But I just can't wrap my head around the logic of it and why it's in the story to begin with. I felt like there was at least set up to have payoff with it later, as we saw the graveyard ghouls dancing in the graveyard earlier on in the book. But I feel like that stuff was shoehorned in there just to have the climax have a resolution, which you didn't really need it to have it there. I kind of wish it went a little balls to the wall and pushed the envelope there to go for like a hardcore fight for the bodies back personally, but you know, it could have been worse, I guess. And then the ending, it's a humorous Goosebumps ending for this type of book, right? It tries to pull the Headless Halloween and try to end on a lighthearted note after such a dark book, which I don't mind here, but yeah. All I have to say is it's one of those endings that imply that the story isn't over, which for this particular book I'll let slide just a little bit, but yeah, I would have preferred a dark ending if you ask me. But fun fact, one thing I forgot to mention, there's the character Audra Rusinus in this book. She was actually a contest winner, like a real life person, who won like a Series 2000 contest. And if you see her name in this book, she's the contest winner of, I think there was a contest involving getting your name put into a Goosebumps book. And this was the book that was the prize, I guess. And Audra, she got a really good book to be put into. And I wish they still did contests like this. I know It's Alive from Slappy World has done something similar in recent years. I wish Stein would do it more because I think it's really fun and it's a cool way to immortalize yourself into the Goosebumps IP. So congratulations to Audra for this one. So yeah, after my long gushing review about this book, honestly, y'all, I really love this. I mean, this is a must-read Goosebumps book if I've ever found one in Series 2000. I do think there are some solid competition here for books being better. I don't think it quite squeezes my top 5, but it's probably my number 6, sadly enough. Like I said, if the ending was a bit better and the whole dancing stuff was just not there, this possibly could have been a 5 out of 5, and I could see myself possibly giving this the best Series 2000 book. For me personally, which is shocking because I'm a massive stan of Are You Terrified Yet? But yeah, I'd probably give this book a 4.8 out of 5 stars. It's a great one. Y'all need to go read this, and if you haven't read it before, do yourself some justice and go check this out. I have heard that some people do find the changing in tone at that certain point of the story kind of silly, and where it goes is not where they wanted to see it go. I can understand that to a degree, but if you're like me and you like stories that go bat crap crazy and balls to the wall with the violence and just out there things, pushing the envelope for kids horror, this will probably itch that scratch for you. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Attack of the Graveyard Ghouls. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this book before. Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'm dying to know. and I'll see you next time.